All right. Well, thank
Hey,
you so
David.
much. Hey, Zakir ji. Once again, a huge
Just
honor.
call me Zakir. This G business is yeah.
Okay. um, well, I see, next to you the picture of your father, Ali Rakah,
Yes.
who's kind of brought the tabla to to the world. I mean, I was just listening to a recording from 1967
Hmm.
live at Monterey,
Ah, yes.
and with the explosive applause after his solo. I mean, you could
Yes.
see that he found a way to connect with.
Yeah.
Um,
That's also one of the highlights in the movie, the
right.
Monterey Pop movie, the his solo, and so this is yeah. I mean, him. He was one of the. I guess he and Ravi Shankarji, uh, both up there, both just turned 100. By the way, their centenary, Ravi Shankarji's centenary is continuing right now. This
Hmm.
is his 100th year. My father had his 100th year last year. So he was a year and change older than Raviji. And they traveled all over the world and played concerts all over. And I guess Monterey was one of them. Woodstock was the other famous ones in America. But I guess on a more uh, large or what you may call mass sense, uh, he was probably the first one to be really heard uh, all over the United States, as a master tabla player, because I don't want to miss out on giving a nod to Pandit Chaturlal, who's a very fine tabla player himself from Delhi, who first came here with Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahib in 1955, and then came again in 19, I think, 57 with Pandit Ravi Shankarji. So he came with them, but in those days, the performances were small and small pockets, and like 100, people and so on at the most, and so that happened. But then all everything broke loose when my father and Ravi Shankarji got together, and starting in the early 60s, and then they started traveling, and then George came into the picture, Harrison, and then there it was, the big and one of the highlights always was in the concert with Ravi Shankarji was that my father played like a 15-minute solo, or by himself, with Ravi Shankarji keeping time, and that people would just like lap it up, and lots of applause all the way through, and they just enjoyed it thoroughly, and his magnetism, his electrifying performances really laid the foundation for us who followed later, Pandit Shankar Ghosh, Mahapurush Mishra ji, and after that I came, and so yes, and this has become and so with Ravi Shankarji, it arrived at a particular point, and then it kind of just sat there because you know it can't be just one person carrying the load. It has to be a collective that has to stand up for a tradition to really be known over a period of time, and so after Ravi Shankarji, Nikhil Banerjee and all came, but they didn't get the same kind of focus as Ravi Shankarji got. I was lucky because, as after my arrival, I connected with Mickey Hart and I connected with John McLaughlin, and so that again, the focus, which needed to go that one step or two up further, happened because of that connection, just as it happened with Ravi Shankarji and my father connecting with George Harrison. My connection with Mickey and John McLaughlin at that point uh, did bring that forward. But I would have to say my father was probably the first tabla player that was heard by the masses all over the United States. I mean, 250 odd thousand people at Woodstock heard that. So that's a lot of people.
That's a big crowd. Yeah, and so some families are court musicians for many, many generations, but with your father, it wasn't that, right?
No.
What's the story there? How did he?
It wasn't in any way putting down the court tradition,
Yeah.
because the court traditions helped
Hmm.
to preserve and propagate Indian traditional art forms. Because there was very little public performances or anything happening, and so the Maharajas and the and the Nawabs in India were the ones who financed the whole process. Even from the times of the Mughal emperors, where treaties were financed by Mughal kings about Indian art and culture, and many books were written at that time. So so that was the case. My father, however, came at a time when things were starting to change a little bit. The British Raj was getting antsy because the freedom movement had started to take off in India, and so the Maharajas were feeling the heat from the British, and so they were like trying to figure out how to, the whole economic and political situation kind of was pulling away from their leisure time with the arts and culture, and so my father arrived at that time, and also the Indian film industry was taking off, and in 1938, early 40s, it was taking off, and the Bombay Talkies, the big film studio, was formed, and so there was a lot going on in Mumbai in that world, and so a lot of the young musicians from the All India radio staffs looked to that to be able to have that kind of work available to them. So my father was one of them who was brought to Bombay and posted in Mumbai as one of the staff musicians in All India Radio. So he had a job, so he didn't really need to go and do the court thing. And it also allowed him to plug into the Indian film industry, and ended up becoming a music composer for over 40 feature films in what is now known as Bollywood. And so because of that, he really had no need to go and work in the courts. And in the courts, you didn't really kind of work. You were like confined to that palace, and you played for the Maharaja and his guest, and you rarely got a chance to go out and perform. So unless the Maharaja traveled to another Maharaja's home for a party and brought his own musicians along, and that was it. So that would happen. So this helped. There was another level of performances that used to take place apart from the palaces, and that were the courtesans, the Baijis in India, and they were the other ones at that point when the Maharajas were having a tough time trying to support the arts. It were the courtesans, who had their own setups, and every evening the rich people of India, the rich Indians and all that stuff, would go in the evening to listen to music. And the Baijis, as we call them, would sing for them and all that. And that would happen in a small sitting arrangement. A lot of the Indian maestros of the time, from Ustad Fayyaz Khan Sahab and Mushtaq Ali Khan Sahab, and even Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab and Amir Khan Sahab and all those guys, these courtesans were studying with them.
Mm.
And therefore they were actually financially supporting these artists, and because of those artists, the main tabla players, Habibuddin Khan Sahab, Thirakwa Khan Sahab, Maseed Khan Sahab, and all these guys, they used to play with those courtesans in those evening performances. So there was a lot of work available for them, because it happened every night except Friday.
Wow.
Friday was off. So the courts were already moving the court musicians to that part, because the courtesans, who were now also not working in the courts, had established their own setup, because they seemed to be a little bit more business savvy than the musicians were. So that happened. So and so there were a lot of musicians in Mumbai because of that, because in Mumbai there were two such areas known as the compounds. where these nightly music events would take place. One was called Pavan Pul and one was called Forest Road. So the Pavan Pul was the earlier in the evening events, which would start like 8:30 at night and will go to midnight, while Forest Roads would start at about 10:30, 11 and go to the wee hours of the morning. So the musicians were constantly occupied at that time. They'll finish playing here and move on to the other side. And so that would happen. So this was interesting. But my father, again, did not get involved in that simply because he had a job at the All India Radio and he had the job with Mohan Studios, which was one of the studios that came into play based on the same ideas like MGM or Warner Brothers or 20th Century Fox. In Mumbai, they established Bombay Talkie and Mohan Studios and Shri Sound Studios and so on. And they all had their stable of artists, actors, actresses, writers, lyrics writers, song composers, singers, and all that. So my father was hired by Mohan Studios to write music for some of their films. So he was one of the 2 or 3 music composers. So he didn't end up even in that courtesan thing, and that's what brought him to Mumbai, and that's what kept him away from the court, being a court musician.
So I read in Mickey Hart's autobiography so long ago, but I think I remember him saying that it was your father basically dropped you off at Mickey Hart's ranch. Is that kind of how you connected with those guys?
I think it was a dramatization of the event in some ways. I was just talking to Mickey about an hour ago, and
oh wow,
and yeah, we're working on a new record, and that's another story. So what happened was Mickey Hart was studying with my father, so he came to LA, and I was with my father at that time in LA, and so Mickey came, and that's where I first met him, and they had a session, and I was sitting there, and I was kind of, helping to, explain a little further to Mickey what was going on, because my English was much better than my father's. So that happened, and then Mickey, I think the next day or the day after, when he was having a lesson, he told my father that he's planning to make a record, and that would my father come and play on the record, just like 1 minute something, just to inaugurate and bless the beginning of the record. And my father said, well, I can do that, and that's fine. And then he said, but you should also play on a few other pieces. And so my father said that, I'm just too set in my ways. I'm too classical, and it's kind of difficult for me to get into the pop or rock or country rock or whatever world that you have. But my son here, he's young, he's worked in Indian film industries and stuff, and has played with a lot of, Western type of musicians from there. And so you take him, and he'll be able to do the same thing that I would do. So that's what happened. And then one day while I was there playing, I came here to play with Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, because Pandit Shankar Ghosh, who was teaching here at the Ali Akbar College, was leaving and had left at that time to go settle back in India. And so I played with Ali Akbar Khan Sahab at that point. And in that visit, I said I might as well visit Mickey Hart, because, my father had put us together and, introduced us. And so that's when I ended up at his door. And one of the students at the Ali Akbar College drove me there. And then I met. And so Mickey invited me to stay in one of the little kind of a cabin, which was also on the property in Navarro. So I stayed there, and I put down the first tracks for his first album known as Rolling Thunder, which was like as a tribute to the medicine chief Rolling Thunder, who was in Nevada. So that's how I ended up with Mickey.
Wow.
And that was 1970.
And you were a young guy,
I
right?
was
And
young. I was what, about 19?
19, and I imagine the world, it was a whole new world, right?
Oh,
Coming from India.
absolutely. And it was such a huge blessing because uh, I had not heard of Ayrton Morera or Armando Peraza or Francisco Aquabea or Olatunji or any of these incredible great masters. I had no clue that these people were there. I mean, I was more like, oh, we in India are the keepers of rhythm and for thousands of years, and we are the ones who are going to teach the world. With no clue that there's so much out there that I should be learning from, and equally old in terms of its ancientness, traditions, and so Mickey pointed those things out to me. So in some ways, he's not only just a dear friend, but and a colleague, but he's also a mentor of sorts, who pointed out to me and brought me to meet Armando Peraza, the great conguero who played with Carlos Santana, and Francisco Aquabea, who were living here, Pete Escovedo, Sheila E.'s father. And there was, and then Olatunji came by. He was in New York, but he would frequently come by to be here, and we'd go see him and spend time with him. And so, and learning a lot. Hamza Eldin, one of the great Nubian percussionists, singers, oud player, was one of the first musicians that Mickey and I encountered and hung out with. And that was such a blissful experience. I have to tell you, I hadn't figured out till then that you could actually use the textures of the surface of the instrument in so many intimate ways that brings out your relationship with the instrument and also brings out the whole shades of tonal experience to the audiences. That was something that we didn't know in tabla in India. We just were used to getting on the tabla and playing the repertoire. Just play it as hard as fast and as loud as we could, and that was it. Those subtle dynamics of an understanding that what the instrument wants to say was not considered as much in Indian music, and so this, I mean, Indian percussion music. So this experience that was brought forward to me with the help of Mickey was really paramount in the way I look at drumming, not just of the world, but also Indian and my drumming.
Right. You brought in, you have certain techniques that no one else really was using, and I suppose it was inspired by
It was
Armando
inspired
and
by,
Peraza.
and it was advantageous for me to do that because I lived here.
Mm-hmm.
If I was living in India, it probably would have been hard for me to do that with all the connoisseurs and the critics and all that there. They may have poo-pooed that whole idea at that point, but this was the chance I got, and I started playing with Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab and living and teaching at his college right here in the Bay Area, and he was okay with it. He was okay with me trying all those things out because, I mean, he and I played with John Handy, and he had already seen the Western music world and system, and so I guess he understood that that can only enhance the interest of the audiences as opposed to turn them away. So that was a good thing.
Right. I love that album with John Handy and Ali Akbar Khan.
Yeah,
That's a
Karuna
classic.
Supreme. I came up with that title.
Great. Did you come up with the title Indian Boogie Shoes, or is that that's one of the songs
No,
there? Okay, yeah, someone
no, that
else's fault.
wasn't. That was John
John,
Handy.
I bet it was.
That was John Handy.
Wow. So
Yeah.
actually, and you had an early rock band called Shanti, which was
Yes.
before, which led into Shakti, which just kind of blew the doors open for
Yes.
so many
Yes.
people.
We tried to do that with Shanti. I mean, it was, I think, in its time, a very unique band because it had sarod, tabla, and it had the regular ensemble of rock band, which is rhythm guitar, lead guitar, bass, and drums. And we started playing, and yes, our producer, Richard Bach, who was the owner of World Pacific Records, wanted us to play more popular songs, come up with songs and singing, while we were like more an instrumental kind of a band who played long instrumentals in a set. So for him, and so that struggle was the one that kind of bogged down the progress of the band, and didn't let it go any further than one record and a few concerts in United States, and that was that. But that kind of brought me to New York, and I met this gentleman called Hank. And Hank Levin, and he was running something called the House of Musical Traditions in Manhattan. And so he invited me to teach a workshop there. He was an instrument maker and did all that stuff. So I went there to teach a workshop there. And in came this gentleman who wanted to not study tabla, but study some vocal scales for Indian music. And I wasn't a vocalist, I was a tabla player, but I said, okay, I'll do the best I can. So I taught him the Bilawal Tart scale, which is the straight 7-note scale, major, and just gave him another idea of what happens the next thing, which is Yaman. And then that was that. And he said, thank you. And that was it. And then I came back to California, and I was teaching at the college. And one day I get a phone call and saying, hello, I'm here in town and my band's playing at Winterland. Would you like to come and see? And I said, of course. And that was, of course, Mahavishnu Orchestra, John McLaughlin. So it was John who I met and gave him a vocal lesson of all things. Wow. So that's how I met John. And then I invited John to come and meet Ali Akbar Khan Sahab. And he came with his acoustic guitar which he practiced on in the car. And we met Khan Sahab. And Khan Sahab said to John, will you play for me? And John said to me and said, would you join me? And that's how we first played in the living room of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab. And it was like we played since our birth together. I mean, the starting and stopping and catching each other's phrases and so on spontaneously was like as if we had rehearsed 100 times. And it wasn't that. And so it was, and that led John to say, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so he got in touch with Shankar, who was the nephew of his Veena teacher. And then we played together in New York and at the Southampton College. And John recorded that on an 8-track machine, and that became the first record. And we decided to call the band call the record Shakti. We didn't even know we were going to go to do the tour, but then for some reason CBS and others felt that there should be a tour, and so the band Shakti stuck, and that's how it all came together.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that stuff is still lightning. It hasn't aged a bit. It's so explosive.
And in those days, you know what? This is an interesting story. We delivered the master tape to Clive Davis at CBS and in New York, and Clive Davis said, "Oh, that's great. Okay, good. Now, what do we call this music?" He said, and we just kind of looked at each other and said, well, we had no clue what we were going to call the music. It was just something that we played together, and we enjoyed playing together, and we did whatever it took to be able to interact, without any hesitancy on the stage. And we had played, and it was live concert, and there was no such thing as world music or new age or even fusion hadn't yet come into play at that time. So we and John said, it's music. I mean, we don't know what to call it. And Clive Davis said, what I need to know, because we need to know which bin to put it in the recording studio, record shop, and also what kind of press to invite to interview you, whether it would be a jazz person or whatever else, classical music, who knows. So that's, I think, was one of the interesting thing that happened that kind of spawned or put into place the idea that there could be something called fusion music or new age music and world music, all these little titles. This was the start of that thing, Shakti, at that time. And even the promoters all over Europe and wherever we played had no idea what to call this music. So it was like, John McLaughlin, Mahavishnu John McLaughlin featuring Shakti.
Right.
It started that way. And then, then John said, no, forget this Mahavishnu John McLaughlin and just call it Shakti. So our second record was basically Shakti, and the third one was Shakti. And we gave it title, A Handful of Beauty was the second one. And what was the third one? Anyway, yes, so there were 3 records that we made, and they did okay for those times, but they were not selling like the Mahavishnu used to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So CBS felt that they forced John to get out of this so they could have him make electric records, so they could sell many, many more records. So that's when Shakti stopped. But the seeds had been sown, ideas had begun to come about, and some other bands started to come together. One of those bands, of course, was Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And people started to want to try to play that kind of music that Shakti had introduced, and Natural Elements was the third record.
All right, yeah. Wow.
So yeah.
They're still trying to figure out. I mean, you created a new bin in the record store, which is something, and I guess they're still trying to figure out what bin to put you in sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just nuts.
So one thing I've always wondered about. I mean, we talked about how you got influenced by the rock guys, particularly when we were talking about Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead. Some of those songs that they do are in interesting, 14-beat cycles and 7-beat cycles. Was that a direct influence of studying with your father at the college?
Mickey brought that to them, studying with my father. And that's like playing in the band is one of the songs, for instance. It's a 10, and it actually emerges from a rhythm riff that my father played.
Interesting.
On one of those days for the first record of Mickey Hart, Rolling Thunder. I was already putting tracks down. My father came up for a little teach at the Ali Akbar College as a visiting a guest teacher, and I took him up to Novato, and we laid down this little thing, and that became the opening riff of the song "Playing in the Band." Right. So that song was first done on Rolling Thunder album.
Wow.
And
Rolling Thunder, the Apocalypse Now, the Digger Rhythm Band, all that stuff kind of ended up culminating in a sense with Planet Drum, which I think is hands down one of the greatest all percussion albums of all time. And of course it kind of won the first World Music Grammy.
First ever World Music Grammy,
I mean, it was a super band. You had...
we had Olatunji, we had Ayrton Morera, we had Giovanni Hidalgo, we had Mickey, myself, the great Vinayak Ram Vikku, and of course, with voice of the fabulous Flora Purin. And so that was, it was an all-star, what you may call the dream team of the time. I mean, I was so happy to be among these people. That was the first time that we discovered Giovanni Hidalgo.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't there on the record itself, but on we brought him in after we had already recorded.
Oh, okay.
And then he put some stuff down, and that was great. And then he was included in the band and on tour. And is an integral part of the quartet that we established, which is Mickey, me, Giovanni, and Sikiru Adepojo.
And I mean, there's tracks where you guys are all using bones. There's tracks where you're just doing body percussion.
Yeah.
And what is it that Olatunji brings to an ensemble like that?
Well, first of all, he brings a certain amount of elegance into rhythm that he had, and he was an elegant person the way he spoke, the way he sang, the way he played the rhythms. And one of the great things was he wasn't going to technically overpower you, but he would place his hits in such a way that, you know, he would be like a Picasso of rhythm, in a sense. He would create this sparse painting, but it would show you the whole picture. And that was something very special about Olatunji, and he brought order to the whole melee, that when a whole bunch of percussionists get together happens. You know, there's a lot of, you know, lot of fancy playing going on, and then there had to be somebody of that status who everybody would look up to, who would, you know, put the hammer down and say, okay, calm down, now let's get this done right. And Olatunji was one of those, and he brought these old traditional shamanic music, which Ayerto mirrored and echoed, because Ayerto is also a shaman musician from Brazil, and it was just one of those gatherings where having someone like Olatunji, Baba Olatunji at the helm, created a smooth conversation between all of us. And there was always something that he could inject into our little moment of rhythm that would make it all fall into place. And that's what Olatunji, you know, that's why we called him Baba. He's Baba.
Right. He's Baba. Yeah. And that first album that he did, what is it? Drums of Passion.
Yeah.
I mean,
that was in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might have even been the 50s.
Great, groundbreaking album, a landmark album.
So, you know, people would be very angry with me if I didn't ask you about your time with George Harrison, and you know, I know he was so influenced by Indian classical music and
Absolutely.
culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine it kind of went both ways. So I'm kind of interested in what kind of impression he left on you, and what you saw happening with him at that time. And I guess it was the 70s that he really was digging into things.
Yeah, he came to our house first. He came in the 60s, late 60s, I think. I think the Beatles were visiting Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and while he was in Mumbai, my father invited him home, and so he came home. I have pictures of his visit from home, so he visited, and I remember he had brought this portable, long-playing record player, portable one with a speaker there, and then he played for us the album that they had just put out, and he was explaining to us certain elements of the album where they played the tape in reverse, and so my father, of course, couldn't latch on to that idea. Like, why would you want to play perfectly all right music backwards? I mean, but it appealed to me, the idea. I said, wow, that's an interesting thought. And so I think it was a Revolver album or something.
Sure, yeah. Turn off your mind, relax.
Yeah. So he played that, and I listened to it. And it was like one of the first experience of listening to their idea of how to make music, because we had listened to, you know, Ticket to Ride and all that stuff, but those were straightforward songs, but there was something interesting going on here, and so that was nice to hear. So that's what happened then. And of course he came back again to India and came and visited us one more time or two more times, I think, but my actual moment of revelation was when he and I were mixing a record in London's Trident studio in Soho. And the record was of Ravi Shankarji, Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, and my father, having played a live concert. So it was like a 2-hour concert, which we had to cut down to 40 minutes. It was the black album with the 3 photos: Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar Khan, my father. So so my Ravi Shankar ji sent me in there saying, well, Zakir will help you make edit. He told George. So that's what happened. So I was helping him. Okay, cut here, cut there. Okay, let's join here. All that stuff was going on. And in that process, through many days, he asked me to play on one of his album songs. And that was that was a title song, Living in the Material World. So
Right.
I put down the tabla track for that. And in that process, we were talking and all that. And I told him that I really wanted to be a rock drummer and play, with a rock band and all that and everything, and, become very famous. And one of the things I asked him was, like, you should, just like I want to be a rock, you should play Indian music. You're a sitar player. You've learned to play the sitar. You've played it on an album. Why don't you play it more often? And so he said to me, Zakir, the reason why you're here with me and you're special to me and unique to me, and you're off because you're bringing something which onto the table which does not exist here. I have 5,000 other drummers who will give up one of their sticks to be able to play with me or on my record or any song. Yeah. So why do you want to be 5,001? There's no reason to do that. And he said, look at me, I have studied sitar, but I would not venture out as a sitar player simply because I will not be able to do justice to what my guru Ravi Shankar ji has taught me, because I'm not that good a sitar player. But I can take all that information that I have learned and transpose it onto my guitar, because that I have some control over, and offer my tribute that way. And that will make me, he said about himself, a unique guitar player with all this information that other guitar players don't have, and therefore a valuable musician and a trend-setting musician. And he said, you have that. You are a young tabla player. You can play bongos on your tabla, congos on your tabla, drums on your tabla, everything. Why do you want to give that up? And you are a great tabla player. You have this ability and talent. So utilize it and be a special one, be a unique one that everybody wants to connect to. So that, revelation was very special. And I said, of course, yes, tabla has the ability, it has the possibilities, it has the technique to imbibe all these elements that are out there in the world. Why not? So that's when the idea of just giving up trying to be a rock drummer and wearing, blingy jackets and whatnot and everything went out the window. And the idea of making tabla be a more all-inclusive percussion instrument came into play. So that is, a story.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to know that even the great maestros like you and George Harrison, everybody's trying to become something else when it turns out that being yourself is the most interesting.
My father told me, don't try to be a master, just try to be a good student and you'll get by just fine. And this actually is true. Everyone who we call master wants to be a student. I mean, Coltrane wanted to learn about Indian music. He had no need to, but he wanted to because he wanted to expand further. George Harrison, the same thing. John McLaughlin, the same thing. Charles Lloyd, the same. Pharoah Sanders. I mean, so many musicians of that time wanted to expand their vocabulary, wanted to, put into play a possibility of being able to explain their music, their presentation, their art form in many languages. And that brought them to learn more. I mean, whether it was Bela Fleck, Edgar Meyer, all these great musicians, they all want to learn more and want to expand their horizons more. And I'm no different. And my father was no different. And Ravi Shankar ji was no different. And Ali Akbar Khan Sahib was nobody. We are all learning. So there's no point in, calling yourself the master, because then that's the day you will stop learning. And therefore you will stop growing. and stop, reinventing yourself, which is what creative arts are all about anyway.
I got one of the most exciting text messages the other day, and it was from Randall Klein.
Oh, yeah.
And he was saying that you had very, what's the word? Graciously accepted to perform at part of our Ragas Live Festival.
Yeah.
It's just a 24-hour thing. And it's a festival that has Terry Riley will be on it, and Tumani Jabate will be on it, and the great Afro-Venezuelan singer Betsaida Machado. So I was curious, I know you don't have to do these things. I was curious what attracts you to being involved with kind of these events with a global focus.
So I can discover and learn more about myself. I mean, I'm a human being on this planet, and what it is about me that makes me a human being on this planet is how not just only what I think of myself, but how everyone else thinks of me and interacts with me. So if I'm playing with a musician that I've never worked with before, he's going to hear my riffs, my patterns, my grooves, my swing differently. And in doing so, it will require me to readjust whatever I'm doing to go in that way. And in doing so, I will discover another way of doing the same thing, telling the same story, but in a different way. I mean, every time you sit around the fire and you tell a story, every day you tell the same story and there's a different twist to it. It just happens, naturally. And if you understand that, that when you are playing with other people, you're not there to just impose your will on them. You're there to be able to converse and therefore allow for an interaction that allows you to point something in their playing that they may have missed because it's right under their noses. And for them, it will allow to have you notice something about your playing that you may have missed because it's right under your nose. It's right there. And you don't pay attention. It's like you're sitting in your living room. You don't see the whole living room. Only when you're outside the window and you look in, you see the whole living room, you and see the whole detail. So there's someone who's looking into you and pointing out that, hey, Zak, how about trying to do it this way so that I could be comfortable with it? And then in doing so, I learn more. So that learning more, that process of finding out more about how I can get better and better and better is one of the challenges that I look forward to, when playing with other musicians and wanting to playing with other artists of all varieties of culture.
I have a million more questions, but I'm going to just go to the Q&A here.
Yeah, sure.
So one person asks how you compare playing with people like McLaughlin and the Shakti with others like Bela Fleck and Chick Corea.
Well, John McLaughlin, took the trouble and took the time to actually study Indian music. He went to Wesleyan University and learned to play the veena. And he also went to Ravi Shankarji and learned about ragas and, how they develop. And he studied with Raghavan and Palghar Mani Iyer, the great South Indian drummers, about how the rhythm cycles and talam works in South India. That made it possible for us to be able to play Shakti because we didn't really have to cross over. Me and Shankar and Viku didn't have to cross over. John came over.
Right.
And to have that ability to be able to sit with us and mix it up in Indian rhythm cycle system. It could be a 8-beat cycle, but the system of improvising in the Indian system, to have that knowledge, that is something so incredibly special to watch from someone who's not of your upbringing, and but sits comfortably with you, like as if he studied music with you in the same room with your teacher. And to have that kind of an interaction is something very special. Someone like Bela Fleck or someone like Chick Corea, they didn't necessarily study Indian music, but they have a mind that is open to suggestions. They they want to learn, they want to find out more. So the difference is that the excitement or the fun of it is to see your ideas as an Indian musician being instantly and spontaneously in real time translated to another form of music, and get thrown back at you and look so different, uh, because you're looking at the phrase, you're looking at a tennis ball like this, a ball. Someone else will take it and turn it over and look at the other way, and so therefore the stitching will look different. And that's what was happening with Bela Fleck and Edgar Meyer, because John did not want to impose on us the idea of we having to sit down with him and learn jazz and learn the form, learn the chordal changes and all that system. So he patiently waited for 2, 3, 4 years for us to be actually start to learn his way. But he stayed with us with an Indian system. So that was the difference. Playing with John was like playing with an Indian musician. Yet at the same time, that Indian musician, while playing with you in an Indian way, was also introducing chordal harmonies and throwing in all these backups to Shankar's solos and stuff. That, I mean, we started to get a hang of it when we made the third album, Natural Elements. We did something called Face to Face in the second album, A Handful of Beauty, which followed that idea, playing to a jazz form. But it really started to happen when we got to doing the last album, Natural Elements. But with Bela Fleck and Edgar Meyer or Chick Corea, it is more like them taking what I know and throwing it back at me. And I'm looking at it saying, wait a minute, is this what I was actually doing? And finding another texture, another tonal idea, another rhythmic permutation of what had gone forth from my side, and then doing that. But at the same time, playing with decades with John and, over those years, we've played for 50 years together. I've crossed over now. I've learned the jazz form. I've learned to understand that. And so I can play, giant step or play, Cherokee or whatever, and know that what the form is, and I can stick with the form and follow the improv that someone else does. And so when I play with people like Bela Fleck or Chick Corea, I look forward to them saying, okay, here's the song. So this is the form. And I can play with them in that manner. So that's different. And now it's happening with John as well. And so the difference took a long time happening, but that's what it is.
I got a great question from Jim Santioan.
Hey, Jim Santioan.
Yep,
how you doing?
Our buddy at Ali Akbar Khan School of Music. He asked, what's the most challenging non-Indian style of music or musician for you to understand and play with?
I think one of the most challenging non-Indian is jazz for me, even though it's like a cousin to Indian music. They both sit in, the main, one of the salient features is improvising. But it took me 20 years or so to actually come to terms with the form, the jazz form. How it took me a long time to understand that I had to learn the form, that I had to actually learn all the standards, so that I could communicate with those other musicians and play the hits where they're supposed to be, and do all that accordingly. So that took a while. It took many years to watch jazz drummers and understand how the ride is on the cymbal. I mean, there are so many subtle things that are going on a drum set, where the hi-hat is doing something or the ride is doing something, and to be able to understand. I mean, I used to wonder, how do these musicians know where the downbeat is? And how, like, the drummer is playing and he's doing all these hits and offbeat stuff and off-tempo stuff and so on, but he comes back in and everybody knows that's the downbeat. And it's how is that possible? Now, to be able to understand that, and to know that jazz like is not just merely play the head and play the bridge and improvise. There's a lot going on in there to be able to do that, and the voicings that people have to do. Herbie once told me that he threw in a voicing when he was on doing a record with playing a concert with Miles, and the voicing was off by a note, and Miles just looked up with his eyes big, like as if he was angry. But he changed that moment by playing a particular riff in there that acknowledged that note and made it all right. It was like a Charlie Parkerish thing to do. Mm. But that so knowing those moments that you're supposed to be able to do this, but not that, even in the improv, or do that, but not more of that other stuff. Just limited. These things are so subtle and so involved and so demanding of a musician to learn. I mean, improvising in Indian music, you merely play a theka, and somebody's improvising, and when it's your turn, you play as many cycles as you want and make the tihai, and that's it. There are no hits to worry about. There are no chordal changes to worry about. There are no forms to worry about. The form is just the teen tal theka. So those kind of things are very important. And so that's what I found very difficult about jazz. With South Indian music, even though it's a whole different kind of style, there were certain relationships already there with North Indian music when it came to rhythm. So it was not as difficult. Another music that I had a little hurdle with in the beginning was Latin percussion, just to understand how the clave worked. Once you understand how the clave works, you're in. And so that was something that was interesting, and Armando Peralta was really largely responsible for me understanding that. And so, yes, that was this. But jazz took a hell of a long time to actually get used to and understand. So when I'm playing with Dave Holland and Chris Potter and we are doing a trio concert, I have to know where Dave is in his solo in the form, so I can understand that and play along with it, or do alternate stuff with it, or complement it, and make sure that all my tablas are tuned harmonically correct, so that when I hit something, it doesn't jar and stand out a la Miles with Herbie. And so those are difficult things to understand.
I have a question from Brian Keir, who gave me actually 30 or 40 questions, of course.
What do you think, a 5-hour interview?
Well, this will be our closer here. He asked, who did, if you could play, who haven't you played with that you hope to be able to play with?
Well, one of the musicians I had hoped to play with just happened, Julian Lage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which I hadn't played with. So I just did. And Charles Lloyd, Julian Lage, and I played together for Healdsburg Jazz Festival's only live musicians in room concert, which was just the three of us there. There was no audience. Mm-hmm. And we were socially distant. And this was the first time I got to play live with musicians in 6 months. And it was such a relief and, such a aha moment that it happened. So Julian Lage, I just played with. There are other musicians I would love to work with there. I mean, there's another element now into play that I'm involved in, which is writing concertos. So I did a tabla concerto, and it was, excuse me, conducted by Zain Dalal, the conductor for Symphony Orchestra of India, and it happened. But I was like looking forward to having another major conductor conduct it. And so that just recently happened when Zubin Mehta conducted it. And so that was great. And then I wrote another concerto for 4 soloists, and it was great to get a major conductor to conduct it, like Mr. Aschenbach, the principal conductor of Kennedy Symphony, National Symphony Orchestra. So that was great to have that. So Julian Lage, and now there are so many other young musicians that I'm watching who play incredible. Like just the other day, was it yesterday, that I was watching on YouTube this Kanjira player who's just so fantastic. I mean, and I just heard him and it was like, wow. And I was thinking about, well, I'd like to, interact with him, work with him a little bit, because, someone like him or Ananta Krishnan, the young Mirdangam player, this is Surinder, a Kanjira player. So Ananda Krishnan, and there's so many other young musicians like Niladri Kumar, Rakesh Chaurasia, Sabir, Dilshad, I mean, Kala, and Ganesh Kumresh, I mean, Jayanti. All these are so many fabulous young musicians who grew up learning Indian classical music and Western music at the same time. So they were learning Rag Bhopali and how to, put that together and live in it. At the same time, seeing a pentatonic scale in the jazz world and seeing how they all work together. So they grew up doing that together. So they have an understanding of Indian classical music, which is like looking out from outside in. That is uncanny, which is unbelievable. I mean, it took me 20 years of playing tabla, 25 years of playing tabla before I started to actually learn about other forms. While these people, by the time they're 25, they've actually grown up learning these forms for 10, 12, 15 years. So their understanding and of how to solo through a raga with the jazz sensibilities in their head, the harmonic sensibilities in their head, or playing mridangam solo with the understanding of how North Indian repertoire works and how they transpose it on their instrument, or a dholak player, Navin Sharma, doing the same, or the dhol player, Deepak, doing the same. It's an amazing thing to watch and to work with them and see them expand your repertoire into, it's like, hitting, with the white striker, the already set pool balls on the pool table and scattering him it, and you see this whole picture of what is possible, and which pocket to take this and which pocket to take that in, and so on. So yes, there are all these great young musicians that I would like to work with. I've seen, there's a piano player in Brooklyn, I think, who's amazing, and I'd like to be able to work with him one of these days. And Antonio Sanchez, would love to work with one of these days. I mean, I invited him to come to Mumbai, and we kind of interacted on the stage that one time, but that was just one time. And so I have to say that there are many, many artists out there, and many who I don't even know, who will just come out of, around the corner, and there they are, and we'll work together. And I'm hopefully going to have a chance and, the ability to be able to interact with them.
Before we say goodbye, someone writes that their 9-year-old son who learns Banaras Gharana tabla is asking what your favorite composition is.
Famous Banaras composition. One of the things that Pandit Kishan Maharaj Ji used to play was the one that evoked the sound of the conch shell. So that's one of my favorite compositions. There are a few others, but I think this is one, because this also has another Banaras Gharana element, which is the Kathak, the dance. They dance it differently, and so they recite it differently. The same composition becomes so the front of it is different. It's geared towards how the dancers dance, but the Tihai part, which is din din remains the same. So it is a composition that at the same time mirrors what happens on the tabla and pakhawaj, and at the same time how a dancer would dance. There are two premier styles in of rhythm in Banaras, which is the tabla style and the Kathak dance style. So they are both represented in this particular composition. So it's a very special thing to have. And one of the things, of course, is Pandit Kishan Maharaj doing the Ganesh Stuti. Gananam Ganapati Lambodar So Hai Bujaja Ek Tantra, that particular stuti is amazing. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in Banaras which is really great, and it's a great combination of Pakawaj and Lucknow tabla baj. So I'm very taken by it. Okay.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for your graciousness.
No, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Thank you for Gabi for organizing all this stuff.
Yeah.
And thank you to Brian Keir for twisting my arm to do it.